I've been in medical devices for about 30 years, and everywhere from I started with large companies, Boston Scientific. I've worked at J&J, but usually the most fun I've had is working at many different startup companies that have taken these amazing, cool ideas and said, how do we solve unmet unmet needs, and solve problems that nobody's been able to solve. And it's really amazing. I've been in the regulatory and quality space this whole time doing this. And in most of these small companies I would be, usually employee number 8 or 10 after, we get the early phase things. And I really, my background is anywhere from 3D printed nasopharyngeal swabs for COVID, which was recent, all the way to, a couple of different neurostimulator devices for treating sleep apnea, for treating hypertension, heart failure, and everything in between, right? So we're gonna kind of go through this, and I want to let you know, in a lot of these little startup companies, I came out of the company and helped create all of the foundation and the quality management system, which we're going to get to, and really put those together for these companies, and came in and put the structure in to help the company succeed and down the road. So what I wanted to do is we'll kind of, I'll stop once in a while for questions, but anytime you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute and ask a question, and I'm certainly willing to make this more of an interactive presentation. So again, we're going to look at really the FDA and software as a medical device. And it's really more than just the code, more than the code. And I want you to think about one thing as you're going along. Every time you think of the FDA, also think of the word investor, because sometimes people investing in you think, I want to, make this product out to clinical practice. The major investors in the world are thinking about these things the same way the FDA does. So we're going to there we go. So first of all, I want to talk about software just in general. There's really 3 main areas of software in the medical device sector. First one, many times software gets used in manufacturing or testing of medical devices. That's very common. Every company, 3D printers have software in them. It doesn't matter what you're making. That's not what we're going to talk about today, but it's a big topic. The second one is when you have software that is integral to the device. So I've worked at companies where you have an implantable pacemaker, implantable neurostimulator, software, firmware. We've got programmers, got all these things. Very complex software. That's not what we're going to talk about. The third one we're going to talk about is software as a medical, which is all by itself is a medical device. It doesn't need the hardware. It just is the medical device, and that's known as software as a medical device, or SAMD, all right, the SAMD. And that's what we're going to really focus on, is software as a medical device. All right. So you got this idea, and I bet it's amazing, that's going to solve a whole bunch of problems. You've got this, great software that can do these amazing things. It's going to take a little bit more than the code, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a few things, and there's some key takeaways that after we're done going through this, you should be able to at least have a understanding that the things exist. And you're not going to be an expert at it, but you're going to have this kind of hopefully broadened perspective on things. So the first one we just talked about, what is a SAMD, right? Software as a medical device, and that was really the first thing. The second we're going to really quickly, who is the FDA? Then we're going to really look at your code. You're like, you're working on this code. It's going to do these crazy, amazing things. It's going to solve these problems. But is it a medical device, right? And so we're going to look at that a little bit. We're all going to talk about risk. We're going to just spend a few minutes talking about challenges of SAMBs and what some of the risks are of those. Tiny bit on clinical evaluation of the SAMB. Again, we're going to broach this very high level. And then we're going to talk about what is a QMS? What does that mean? I'll give you the hint. It's quality management system, but we'll get into more details. And then the last one is a big one, is when should you introduce QMS into the picture, right? And again, the context of my discussion here in the talk is that you may want to put your idea into clinical practice and commercialize this. These are all things you need to be thinking about, or somebody needs to be thinking about them at the company. And so these are really important. So these are the takeaways. So we're going to start with the first one. Any questions up till now? You showed up to the wrong Zoom meeting. You're like, I'm not sure this is the one I thought it was supposed to. All right. So again, if you have any questions, set them in the chat and we can.
But immediately I realized that employee number 8 correlates with the answer to the last question.
Ah, okay.
Right? You said you were employee number 8, 9.
Employee number 8. So honestly, I'm the employee that usually all the R&D people are like having all this fun and they're creating all these crazy ideas and they're looking at all these things, and I show up and they're like, oh, fun's over, the quality and regulatory is here. And so this is I'm usually put organizational structure in, and again, but sometimes I was employee 13, so I was lucky number 13 as well. So.
And maybe 8's too late. We'll hear.
Maybe 8's too late. Just depends on the size of the company. So, who is the FDA? I know people have heard of them because you hear about it. If you didn't hear about it a lot, you hear about it a lot now with all of the vaccines and COVID. But it's the Food and Drug Administration, and I know you probably know this, but I want to tell you this because it's a perspective. Their job is protect you and me. They're protecting the public health by looking at safety, efficacy, and security. Is it going to hurt anybody? Does it work? And is it secure, right? That's their job. And so whenever you think about that, also you should think about some of these strategic investors that you may someday want to have invested in your company that you're growing are going to also be thinking about these things, as well as, hey, this is a great idea, because I want to tell you, historically, companies, big companies, and I'll name a couple because it's all public, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, J&J, they've invested in these little companies only to find out they open the hood and there's problems that either wasn't thoroughly documented or we didn't, things weren't as they seem, let's say, and had to shut down whole entities because they purchased them, and then they're not worth anything because there was a lot of missing pieces when they really got farther down the line. And so the point of that is, in today's world, these companies have gotten a lot more savvy, and along with the Food and Drug Administration, if they ever come to invest in you, think about how their perspective is going to be. Well, they open the hood and they're like, what are we buying? What are we investing in, right? So just keep that in mind whenever you see FDA. Think maybe one of my future investors, right? The second thing is the FDA chairs a whole working group on global guidance for SAMB. So they're very knowledgeable, and they do pull in a lot of international folks and industry into how to think about software as a medical device. All right, so that's really, I want you to think the FDA is also one of your key stakeholders, and they can make or break you. So you always have to be thinking about the regulators. So let's think about your code. Now, like a lot of people, you think about a medical device, it's pretty straightforward, right? Well, when it gets to the software as a medical device, or SAMD, it gets a little more complicated. And so as you're thinking about, I've got this amazing idea, and here's how I want to, here's the clinical practice we're going to put this in. Think about, I've got a couple of bullet points. They're kind of wordy, but they're important. So does the code provide a mean or suggestion, right, for mitigation or moderation of a disease? Does it help? Does it help soften the harms, or, and again, it doesn't have to be the thing that fixes it. It can just suggest, right? Also, if it's providing information, right? Most of these software as a medical device, you might be post-processing information, doing data analytics, trying to make sense out of all this mountains of data, and providing direction and information. And it gets, you might be a medical device, right? And if you're a medical device, then you're a regulated industry, and again, your friend and part of your business is going to be the FDA. Also, could be an aid to diagnosing or screening, monitoring. So again, it's not as straightforward as just a medical device. These the FDA and others have realized that this software can do amazing things, and they've kind of broadened the net on this. So again, these are all things that you're writing code and you're like, I wonder if I fall into one of these. And there's guidance documents. Go to the FDA website, and there's lots of guidance documents on. I've got some references in the very back, but tons of guidance documents on SAMD and this part right here. Any questions so far? Okay, so now we're pretty sure you're still here, maybe. So maybe you're thinking, you've got that idea in your head. This is going to be a medical device. So we'll keep going. All right. Now.
Well, it's a minor question, Dave, and I'm sure you'll touch on it. But examples of software that does not constitute a medical device that we may have in our pocket right now, right? But doesn't but doesn't hit any of the bullets that you've mentioned there, and is therefore not a regulated medical device. But our phones are loaded with software that kind of is close to what you're describing there.
Yes, absolutely, and that's why you can go in the quote unquote the Google doctor, right? And you can actually search for diagnosis and search for information. I mean, just simple things. I have a medical device. I have a EKG device, a little mini EKG device with it's not pure software, but again, it can do it can do an actual 4-lead EKG. So there's some, these phones are amazing.
EKG was the example I was thinking of, yeah.
Which one?
Well, I'm guessing that there are regulated and unregulated flavors of EKG type apps, depending what recommendations they're making to the user.
Yes. And, so there's the non-regulated ones, which you can go out and just pick up an app that will do, heart, look at your heart. I've got a phone. I've got a watch here that will measure my heartbeat, right? Tell me my heartbeat. I've also got, but that, again, there's this gray line. And so what the takeaway for people here is this. Don't be an expert in regulatory, all right? But what you should know is that there's an assessment that needs to happen. And you should find people along the way that can help you assess whether or not this is a medical device, because it's not black and white. It's far from it. And and every day somebody's coming out with some new idea and invention. So, this whole thing, just the idea here is that the net is broad and cast wide, and so what can be a medical device? But before you assume that it is or isn't, talk to some experts, bring in people, because be an expert in your code and be an expert in your product. There's lots of other experts out there to help you with all kinds of other things, so you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you should know that this is an important distinction, whether or not you're going to be a regulated device or not.
Great, thank you.
Great question. And the other thing about risk is I always say risk is in the eye of the beholder, right? So the software as a medical device has some really unique challenges, right? First one, this is not rocket science. Your software might behave differently, right, on different platforms. See it all the time. Works on a computer, doesn't work on the phone. Works on an iPad, doesn't work on this, doesn't work on that. So the platform that people are actually running the code on, and whether it's a cloud platform or a hardware platform, wherever it is, it may behave differently. It may give different information output. And so these are the things that, as a coder, you're thinking about, but other people are also thinking about that, by the way, because they know it's a challenge. Here's another challenge. Some call it a feature. Updates are made available for the user to install. You don't have to go on a plane, go out to the hospital, go install the software. Today, we've got our phones, we've got, my TV, it updates, it's automatically, right? It just, things happen, right? But that also presents some risks that, the update, what if I need to uninstall because I'm having a problem? And is your software, is your code have that ability to have a layperson do the installations, right? So it's some really interesting challenges. And another one is, once you let that software outside of your environment, it can be duplicated and spread and modified. And so, outside of your control. This presents some really huge challenges for everybody, right? Some other, challenges. This is the beauty of software. Rapid development cycles, and you can just try it, make it, ready. It's the old ready, aim, fire, fire again, aim again. You just keep iterate, right? That's just part of some of the agile processes, some of these other processes. You can change really quickly, and then deliver this all like one, fell swoop, right? But these challenges, and people like the FDA and other people who are concerned, they may compromise. Those challenges could compromise the safety, effectiveness, or the security of your code, right? And that's why I love, this is one of my favorite views of perspective, right? We're all looking at the same thing. We're all looking at the same code. The FDA may look at it one way, the coder is looking at it another way, right? And everybody's right, but we have a different perspective. And it's important as you take your business and your idea and start thinking in clinical practice, it's important to think about what it can do, and it's also important to think about how it might not do those things and some of the risks. So just again, you're going to need a lot of people helping you bring product from the idea in the code to practice. And along the way, you're going to see these viewpoints from a lot of different angles, and you should just be aware that they're out there. And the best thing you can do is try to think about it differently and make sure that you should not be surprised. There's been every medical device company, every startup company that I've ever worked in, they call them key opinion leaders, all right, KOLs. These are medical practitioners out in the world who are looking for solutions that they don't have. And there is always going to be the people who think your company's idea is the best idea that's ever been introduced, and they're going to be out there promoting that product. And then there'll be the other half who are thinking those people are a bunch of cowboys and they shouldn't be doing those things because it could harm people, right? So even in the medical community, there's a very broad spectrum of perspective. And so you should, when you're out there talking to the clinic, talk to people who think it's a good idea and talk to people who maybe don't think it's a good idea, and try to get perspective, right? A broad perspective, because that's going to help you down the road as you try to make it you put your product into clinical practice and minimize surprises. Hang on a second. All right. Clinical evaluation. I'm not going to spend any time except to tell you that you may be asked to do clinical evaluations, and what they're looking at is risks and benefits posed by your code. They're like, this is going to be fantastic, but see, there's a lot of work in here, and you've probably been thinking about these things of clinical evaluation, but you may have to, depending on your product, there are products who can, you can go out there and say, my product's just like their product, and we're not doing anything different, and you can submit that to the FDA, and the FDA is like, yep, you're good. There are other products where you have to do a clinical trial, and it's very multi-million-dollar trials of your product. And so again, this is things to think about early in the genesis of your idea, and thinking about funding and those types of things. Make sure you're looking far enough ahead for clinical evaluation. When you think about risk, okay, when you think about, I'm going to back up the slide a little bit. When you think about risk, these risk assessments need to be documented. You have to write some of this stuff down. When you think about clinical evaluation, these need to be documented. You need to write some of this information down. And just like this next one, we talk about software quality. So this is where now they're starting to get into coder wheelhouse, all right? So when you start thinking about things like, I'm writing code, I have code requirements, maybe I have a user, I start with a software requirements specification, SRS, and then I have maybe some requirements documents, I have code requirements. There are a whole set of software engineering practices, which you probably are learning all these things or know it. But the important thing is to start thinking about putting processes together, written processes of how you do these things. Now, the good news is nobody has to invent this. It's already been invented. There are lots of models out there. There's agile models. There's all kinds of other models, but there's one specifically for medical devices, and I have it on the screen, IEC 62304. You can write it down, but it's not free. So I'm just letting you know, be prepared to pay a couple $100 to get a copy of that, or know somebody that can that can borrow you a copy. But that 62304 is a software development process, all right? And why that's important is because the FDA wants to know, did you use an organized approach for your development, or is this a bunch of spaghetti code, nobody really knows anything, there's nothing documented, right? And so they want you to pay attention, right? And this 62304 is medical device software. And now we're going to, now we're going to bring up this topic of QMS, right? So the QMS is the big umbrella of quality management system that you will need to think about as you move down, move along in the process. They generally align with the software development, software quality. And so the good news is, if you think about both of these, you're going to need them both, right? You're going to need to integrate the two together, right? And I'll show you high level how to do that, all right? Because what the next thing we're going to talk about, which is kind of like, okay, this has all been great, but what is this quality, what's this QMS thing you speak of? It's like, so any ideas, when I say what's a quality management system, what does that mean to anybody? Any thoughts on that?
Documentation.
Writing stuff down, documentation, right? Anything else?
Change control, version control.
Version control, right on. What else when you think about quality management system?
Kappa.
Kappa, corrective and preventive action. Any other thoughts on this? All right, so
Audit trail.
Audit trails. So again, documenting things. So here's every company I've ever been at. Engineers, coders, nobody likes to write anything down. Nobody ever likes to write anything down. Everybody likes to just go, go, go. But this is why when you implement a quality system, implement a quality management system, it's time to write things down. But I want to leave you, think about documentation this way. It's kind of like a patent. I know everybody thinks about patents. You can have the best idea in the world. If you don't write it down in a way that's patentable, there's no value as a patent. It's a great idea, but it's not a patent. It's, you don't write it down, you don't get a patent. Same thing happens with medical device stuff. You can have the best ideas in the world, do a whole bunch of things, but you don't write it down, there's no value, right? If a company were to invest in you and they say, hey, we want to invest $1 million in you, what do we get? And if you say, well, you just get whatever's in my head, they're like, well, maybe not quite $1 million, maybe a little bit less, right? So what you're doing is you're creating value by documenting things, right? If you think about it that way, then make sure, do it in the most efficient manner, because everybody has to do it, but it does add value. All right, so yes, some of those things. Part of it is these three things. Your quality management system is your organizational structure, responsibilities, and resources, right? Because nobody cares, especially the FDA, that you don't have enough money to do this stuff right. They want to know, do you have, they never want to hear the excuse, well, we didn't have the resources, right, to do what is a regulatory requirement, right? And why do you think they want to know what the organizational structure is? Well, I'll tell you. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, it's not so they know who to blame. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, so the FDA used to when they would be angry with people, they would go after the people that wrote documented things, and they realized they were just wasting their time. So they start putting the president and the CEO's name in all of their warning letters, and they want to know who to blame. Actually, they want to know, but not blame in that way. What they want to know is ultimately like who is responsible for these decisions that the company's making, right? Because they want to know, they want to have that, like, I want to like talk to you. I don't want to talk to this person over here. I want to talk to you because you are managing the resources, the personnel, the responsibility, right? So it's really so they can cut to the chase and get to the right person. The other thing is we're looking at lifecycle processes, which we'll talk about. That's QMS. Procedures, work instructions, right? Procedures might be how to do corrective and preventive action. The procedure might be, how to do configuration control. Your work instructions might be how to actual protocols for testing, kind of like doing out in the lab, right? And then records. Now I want to show you this. This is this pyramid here. A version of this pyramid is, in 30 years, I've seen this in almost every quality manual. It's the kind of pinnacle document, but it's a description of the quality system. It's been used and abused forever, and it probably will continue. So this is really something you'll see a lot of. But again, there's a lot to it, right? And I want to show you, when I talk about life cycle processes, this is where there's only 4 things you need to remember about product life cycles, all right, in medical device. This is probably true in others, but there's 4, right? The first one is this is development, research and development, design work, early coding. This is where, like, we're creating all these crazy new ideas and look at all these neat things. And then they call operations. And this is really like making commercial code, right? This is making the product ready to send out to a clinical, out in clinical practice, right? And this is the one where it's kind of like, to me, it's like, you've got a class on code, and then you've got your final project, and it's like that final project is the operations. Like, it's like you got to get it right, and it's got to be perfect, and you get graded on that one. All the other stuff is just like, hey, we can do iterate, but we got to get it right when we get into operations. The next one is distribution. This is where you send product out in the field, and you start. This is where the magic starts happening out in the clinical practice. And then you need to keep an eye on things, right, to make sure the wheels don't come off. And so when you talk about this, risk management, product development, these are all processes, inclusion of SOUP. I hope, if you don't know what SOUP is, it's software of unknown provenance, means all the little tools that you got on the website, on somebody's website, that does all these fun things. That's that. Operations. Now you get that software configuration management. We get to other things like how you make upgrades to your deployed base, product deployment, and then here's your complaint handling. Kappa might be in there. Software problem. So again, all of these processes for the different life cycles of the product need to be in your quality management system, right? And so this is a required by the FDA. I thought I might have a slide in a different spot here, but here's the main takeaways for you as you think about creating a product in a company. You need to have a good structure and governance with good resources to operate the quality management system. You saw all this stuff here. It doesn't come for free. This takes work. Not just writing it, but actually making sure you're following it, right? This takes more than, this is a very specific processes, right? So you need to think about the resources, but the second biggest thing is scalable, right? A lot of people will want to copy something they've seen and say, oh yeah, this will work great. Well, a lot of people will copy. I've worked in startup companies where they're like, hey, we got all these processes from Medtronic or Boston Scientific, and you go, that's great, but it's way over the top. It's not what, we need something very simple and streamlined. And so the important thing to do as you think about following and creating processes and practices is to start small and grow it as you go along. Because it's easy to get processes that work, just may not work for you as you're thinking about translating your product into your idea into a real product.
Dave, there's a question in chat.
Yes.
What is the medical device reporting monitoring process like? Do you ever need to renew your FDA approval once you get it? What if you have a big update that you need to send out or add new features to the product?
Great question. Depends on the product type, so it depends, but so when you get approvals from the FDA, it'll tell you if you make any changes, they'll kind of give you the boundaries of that, but it's really, there's a whole nother statute, Code of Federal Regulations, part, it's either 803 or 806. One of them is removal of product and the other one's medical device reporting. But there's a whole bunch of requirements for if you have to make notifications and pull product from the field or have to report. So the reporting one is if your device, so SAMD, has caused or contributed, right, to patient harm, right? That's the short version of it. You may have to report this to the FDA. There is something, if you write this down, it's MAUDE, M-A-U-D-E, MAUDE database of adverse events. Anybody publicly can look up all of the adverse events that have happened for all medical device companies. If you're a medical device company and you have one, it's on there, all right? That's a whole, there's a whole nother set of requirements. But that's why you'll have, I'm not going to exaggerate, this is probably a 7 to 8 page procedure for a medical device. Could do it in 3, sure. But it's a complex procedure that has a lot of if-then statements. Do I have to report this to the FDA within 5 days? Do I have to report it in 30 days? Do I have to do a second report? There's a lot of things going on, but that question and that one little thing, every one of those has the ability to have. That's why this is an investment in the company, right? It's a big investment, and you have to. And these are all required by the FDA if you want to be in the medical device space. So scalable. So here's what you need. When do you need the QMS? Okay, here's the takeaway. You've been told by every business person, before you go start a company, get a business plan, right? But the analog to that is a QMS implementation plan. You should know, you start thinking about that early. What do I need? Do I need all of those? Do I need all those life cycle elements back here? Do I need all, or part of them, right? And which ones are we going to flesh out? Which ones are we going to farm out to somebody? Which ones are we going to do? And the timing, right? So again, QMS implementation plans, and I've done a lot of these because every small startup company, we've created one of these so that we just have like, here's what we're getting ourselves into, right? Because it's a lot of work to when you fully implement QMS. So think about the planning is extremely important in this, and it will help support regulatory submissions, all right, which is the things you have to tell the FDA along the way. You can't just take a product and start selling it. You got to keep the FDA in the loop, and sometimes you have to, many times have to send, they call it submissions. You have to get approvals from them. So this will help support all of that, right? So these were, the key takeaways. Is your code, perspective of risk, clinical evaluations, what's QMS, and when do you introduce the QMS in the process? This was a lot of things to condense. I know Chuck had me take out a bunch of stuff out of here just so I could condense it down to the 46 minutes or so that we've been going along here. And I apologize for droning on here. So I'm gonna at this point, open it up to any questions. We can go back and talk about this, or wherever kind of open it
Please,
up.
Well, great, Dave. That's great. And if anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself and ask the questions. Well, there is one that came across. Apparently, lots about them mics don't work. But somebody asked a really interesting one, that how are AI algorithms treated by the FDA, since they're black boxes rather than direct code development, than deterministic handwritten code?
Well, that's a great question. So now they are going to evaluate it, right? So they evaluate. Let me see if I can find this thing, right? So when they look at your algorithms, okay, so when you have patient data comes in, now you've got this algorithm that is black box, right? And it could be black box, they call it software of unknown provenance, whether it is or not, but most of the time, they're going to say, if this algorithm doesn't do its job, what could possibly modify the output? Does this have the ability to modify the output where this would be incorrect information, right? So if you're going to use some of this artificial intelligence, you can use any black box code or any black box, processing algorithms. The thing to think about is, what is the risk? What is the likelihood? So risk, and then this is a whole other topic. Risk is likelihood of the hazardous condition resulting in the harm, right? So the hazard's not knowing what this thing is actually going to do, because it's it uses some algorithms unknown to people. And what's the likelihood that will give you an incorrect output? So now if you have no other controls in there, the FDA may treat that as a high risk, because if that makes an incorrect decision and a patient dies because of it, they're first they're going to blame the FDA, because the FDA wasn't smart enough to stop you, prevent you from doing something silly, and then they're going to come look for you, right? So they're going to treat this as as risky. All right. I hope that kind of answered your question. It's really code can do amazing. The AI can do amazing things. We just have to know what the guardrails are for. Will it keep it in the guardrails properly, right? And you may have to post-process that decision to make sure it stays there.
Okay, if they follow up in chat, I'll pass it along. But there's another question here that you mentioned needing funding a few times because it doesn't come free. How much does it cost to go through the whole approval process?
So imagine, just think about how much money you think it should take, and then probably put a factor of 20 or 30 on that. No, I say that because here's the reality is, I'm going to use the old, it depends, right? So the good news is if it's a Me Too kind of product, it's less money. If it's the first of its kind, it will cost you more. And so think about a couple of things. The cost to submit and get the answer back doesn't cost you, that first time doesn't really cost you anything. It's the time that costs money. Okay? And if you're going to get help writing, submissions, submission help is by the hour. And I'm going to say, I'm going to say probably anywhere from, 100,000 to I've worked at companies at $30 million and they still haven't gotten a product yet, right?
I think that's scaring startups. Okay.
No, you know what? It's really about, talk to, the main thing is I'm not a finance guy, but talk to people. People always say venture capital is evil, but venture capital has the experience of going through this a few times. So, but talk to a lot of different people about funding, because you'll need more than you think. Bottom line. I see telemedicine device. Will telemedicine device be regulated? Great question. I would, again, I'm going to guess, just without knowing any context, that the answer is it depends on the, you can go out to the Mayo website and it'll tell you all kinds of things, and then it always says, but this is not a diagnosis, and you need to go talk to a doctor, right? If the intent of the device is to make a diagnosis and you're going to say this is what it is, and there's no like go talk to a doctor, you should probably, it will probably need to be regulated, right? That's why they don't exist right now. Even go, I did a virtual with the real doc, when I say a doctor physically, through telemedicine, and it's they still tell you, nope, you need to go talk to go have a checkup, right? So consulting will not.
I guess that means be regulated.
They were consulting via telemedicine.
Oh yeah, consulting via that's I don't know the answer to that one. Boy, that's a, again, I don't know if that's software.
F, do you want to unmute and clarify that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's great, thank you. So basically it's like if you use telemedicine for consulting purposes, not for diagnosis purposes. Though, I mean, you can suggest the next step is going to go to see the doctor, but for the consulting, and you still need to take image, those kind of things. Is it going to be regulated? Is it considered to be patient data? And is it going to be regulated?
So here's what I'd tell you is the answers depends on your claims on your either website or what you're saying, okay? Because it happens every day. The FDA goes after companies who are making recommendations, who are doing consulting, who take the next step and say, this is what you have, and this is how you fix it. And then the FDA would say, oh, well, now you are doing diagnosis and treating, right? So now you're a medical device company and you haven't submitted anything, right? So it's a very the answer is it's going to be depends on exactly the words that are in your consulting, telemedicine consulting or device, right? The answer is you could probably do it without, but you're going to tread a line, and you just have to be cautious.
So FDA is going to go after you.
Well, the FDA does. I mean, you can go on the FDA's website and you look at 480. It's called 480 warning letters, 483 warning letters, and you'd see it every day. They go after companies who are saying if you drink this, eat this, apply this to part of your body, it will solve these certain things, or if you or diagnosis, right? And so this is where it gets if you're going to start doing something like that, you're going to want to have a regulatory opinion on a regulatory consulting opinion on what the information you're saying.
Well, we're talking about the product here and a medical device, and medical devices themselves don't do consulting. So it's the user of it that does consulting. So there's really two elements of that here.
Yeah. And again, it's going to really depend on. I'm looking at the question. I don't know. I'd have a hard time with this without knowing a ton more about the specifics. But the bottom line is the answer is, if it could be. I'm sorry. It's going to be like, well.
Let's say if the consulting is you use a telemedicine device and then you, for example, whatever dermatology issues, and then the patient take a picture, and then using their phone and upload it to the app or whatever things, and then send it to the other side for the doctor for consulting. It's not for diagnosis, but definitely that's advice, medical advice. And then so he said, oh, you probably need to see the dermatologist in future days. So in that sense, the medical device is going to be their phone.
Yeah, the medical device, because it's providing information, that the diagnosis is the I would say because the medical physician is taking information and making a diagnosis, it probably wouldn't get classified as a medical device. If, on the other hand, they're taking that information and feeding it into something that says, oh, this is what's going on, that may need to get regulated. So it's, again, it gets a little tricky because medical professionals, doctors, have a different, they have some latitude in what they can do that normal companies can't. They can actually, I don't want to get into that whole thing, but there's a whole other set of regulations that doctors have to follow that medical device companies do not. And vice versa.
Thank you so much.
Well, Dave, with respect to the clock, I want to thank you for your seminar, and then I want to say, just like if we were here together, maybe if you're willing, we could hang out in overtime afterwards. Is that okay with you, Dave?
I've got a few minutes. I do.
A few minutes. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Well, then, Dave, thank you so much for that talk. Really excellent, very enlightening. I have a bunch of questions. Maybe we can get to them